Northern Ireland Chamber of Commerce and Industry are delighted to partner with Narratology, the Belfast-based executive search firm, on a high-profile and inspirational CEO in Conversation with podcast series. The series will feature the stories of business leaders from across various sectors of Northern Ireland's commercial and industrial community, with the aim of inspiring listeners by sharing the experiences of our C-suite guests.
Hello and a very warm welcome to another episode of the Northern Ireland Chamber's podcast series In Conversation With. This podcast is brought to you in partnership with the executive search firm Narratology. I'm Mark Devenport, and I've spent more years than I care to remember covering the twists and turns of political developments at Stormont. But in Conversation With, I've been enjoying the chance to chat to some of our business leaders who've been keeping the local economy ticking over during that time. Today, my guest is Sara Venning, who is Chief Executive of a publicly owned company, which is quite literally vital to every one of us, Northern Ireland Water. Sara, you're very welcome to In Conversation With. Can I begin by asking you a little bit about how you got where you are today? What's been your career path?
Thank you, Mark. It's lovely to talk to you. I suppose you could think of this in terms of nature or nurture. And to be honest, I'm not really sure which would have the strongest pull. But I do think that my early years had a very strong influence on my attitude to work and how I conduct myself. So I'm the eldest of four. And as such, I think a born organiser and problem solver. I grew up in the 80s, and in our house, when I look back at the 80s dramas, I just think the 80s were a miserable time, very brown and dull and drab. And certainly in our house, we didn't have a lot by way of disposable income. So that notion of if you wanted something, you worked for it was ingrained in us, very much second nature. And we were also very much encouraged to work hard at school. I remember my mother saying that qualifications were very easily carried, and they were signposted as the route to an easier life, to a more affluent life. So I had a part-time job from the age of 14, and I suppose at some stages of my teenage years I had maybe 3 different jobs. But at school I loved maths and science. And funny, we were talking about this in work recently, there was no Google. So when you liked the subject, you went to the careers library, there were leaflets, and the leaflet said that anyone who liked maths and science should be an engineer. So I took a look at that and thought, when I was trying to pick where I would go to university and what I would study, I wanted something that would give me a good chance of getting a job and that would pay well. So engineering ticked both of those boxes, and I chose electrical engineering, probably more on gut feel than on anything else. And to be honest, I've never looked back. So I went to Queen's in Belfast, and I was one of about 10 girls in a class of over 100. I've always worked in utilities. So when I graduated from Queen's, I got a trainee engineer role with NIE. And over the next 14 years, had a variety of technical and then managerial and business improvement type roles. I joined NI Water almost 11 years ago, almost to the day actually, it was this time of the year. And I joined as a director of customer service delivery. So NI Water were starting their journey in terms of price controls and really focused on customer service and efficiency. And that was the role that I was brought in to do. So it was right up my street. And 4 years later, I was lucky enough to be able to apply for the role of chief executive. And that takes me up to date.
Well, you said there that you were one of 10 girls in a class of about 100. So what was it that you think set you apart from so many other young women who don't choose maths, science, engineering, that kind of career path forwards?
I don't understand why people didn't pick it. For me, I think there was something there about return on investment. So with maths and science, the beauty for me was it's either right or it's right, and if you get the answer wrong, you got marks for method. So I just thought that your return on investment was much higher for those subjects than it was for the arts type subjects, where I was certainly less talented. So for me, it was so natural to do those subjects, and I still struggle. I have 3 daughters now, and I struggle with people who say, I just can't do maths. It's just too hard. And I spent my time saying, no, please, I think the key is having a real positive attitude to the subjects. But I know there's a whole lot more to do in that area, because too often girls think it's not for them. It certainly wasn't a dirty job or a hands dirty job, or study path. I just loved it. Brilliant. Really great study time that I had.
Well, you obviously had the knack for it since you went so far. Coming on to the job that you're doing now, I mean, the delivery of water from locks and reservoirs to our taps, it's largely unseen by the public. Do you think we all appreciate the importance of having a clean, safe, secure supply of water, and how much effort goes into ensuring that's the case?
But you know, like when we were setting out our strategy for NI Water, we were trying to crystallise and articulate what's our company purpose. And when we did that exercise, we settled on, we provide the water for life we all rely on to thrive. And I guess that probably sums it up for me. Of course, everyone expects that their water and wastewater services will always be there, always on. And in NI Water, I think as a team, that's what we endeavour to do. But to make sure that that happens, we have to have more kilometres of pipework than there are kilometres of road in Northern Ireland. We are the second largest landowner in Northern Ireland. We have a huge electricity bill, so our electricity bill is £30 million per annum. And there's almost 1,400 dedicated staff monitoring, testing, responding to customer demand on a 24/7 basis. So it's a truly amazing business with such a real wide range of activities taking place. But, you know, the big sense in our organisation is that real pride. We're really proud to be involved in doing that work.
Well, hopefully we're now beginning, in this part of the world at any rate, to embark on our recovery from the coronavirus pandemic. We're all well aware of the public health instructions and the need to wash your hands regularly in order to kill off the virus. What kind of challenges did your teams face in keeping the water flowing to our taps during this pandemic?
It's hard to believe that we've been living with this for over 12 months, and it is fantastic to see an opening up of society. Our team in Northern Ireland Water, I think, responded tremendously well to a series of challenges, some of which were hidden probably. We have about 550 staff who are field-based or who work in our labs, and so they can't work from home. So the first thing that we needed to do back in March was to ensure that we could keep them as safe as possible while they all work to keep us safe. And then we have about 750 office-based staff who were mobilised to work from home. And I have to say that our IT team did us really proud. They got us up and running immediately, so we had no blip. And they even decanted a call centre to home working in days. And that's something that you probably wouldn't even have contemplated being able to do in months pre-COVID. But really, that bit was probably only the basics. So if you think back to this time last year, we were all no sooner working from home than we were enjoying the lovely, dry, sunny weather, which was super for getting those family walks in. But what we saw in our business was a huge increase in the demand for water. So people were leaving hoses on overnight. They were filling pools and hot tubs that maybe took 6 to 8 hours of constant water usage to fill. And that's using up about the amount of water that a family of 4 would use in one day just for one pool fill. So we came close in May of last year of being unable to produce the amount of treated water in quantities that would match the demand for it. So there was a huge company-wide coordination where we were maximising production, we were moving water across our network, and we were working with the public to appeal for their support in water conservation. So once we got past that peak, then the dry weather progressed on for quite another while, and our concern then turned to the amount of water available in our reservoirs, which were beginning to drop quite sharply. So again, we were in incident mode, taking action to try and protect those constrained water resources right across the country. So it was a very busy time, but the great news was that we were able to protect consumer supplies right across the province. And then I suppose if I think back, it really wasn't just dealing with a high demand for water that we were working on, but we needed to work with our supply chain partners. So we're a huge organisation, and we have quite a reach into the local economy here. So we needed to work with all those businesses. Initially, on our big capital programme, we shut down all our sites. And we thought they might be shut for a few months, but they were actually only shut for about a couple of weeks. So then we had to go through the process of getting them all opened up again and ensuring then right across the board that working practices were done in line with COVID restrictions. And I suppose then for any of the organisations, making sure you look after your people is a key consideration. So we were introducing a range of initiatives to try and make sure that we could stay connected as an organisation, with a real focus on making sure that no one got left behind. Nobody was isolated in their home or felt out of part of their team. So really, really busy, 12 months, but a tremendous performance. So in terms of all our KPIs, we have performed exceedingly well, and really we've, in some instances, done better than we might have done previously. So I'm delighted with how we have performed, but it was very busy, especially in those early days.
Those concerns that you had in the spring of last year about potentially running short, could they be replicated as we go into the summer of this year, or are you more confident right now?
Well, you know, if demand exceeds supply, so at the end of the day, reservoirs are holes in the ground. So no matter how much it rains, they can only hold a certain amount of water. And if as consumers, if as customers, we use too much water, you do run the risk of using more water than can be treated. And it's really only an issue where you waste water. So running a hose overnight is wasting water. So I think we have a huge job ahead of us here in Northern Ireland of really conveying that message that, yes, let the rain take care of your garden, capture the rainwater, be a more considerate gardener, and remember that the water that comes to your tap comes with a big carbon footprint. It has to be treated, chemicals are involved, and it has to be pumped. So I think water conservation is a key message for us. So our own behaviour is what really will impact and dictate on whether we have sufficiency of water supply really here in Northern Ireland.
For most parts of the year, we're blessed by generally not being a part of the world where we're short of a drop of rain. But how significant a factor is climate change for Northern Ireland water? What are you doing in that regard?
Yeah, climate change is really actually significant for us, and indeed, I suppose, when we set out our strategy for Northern Ireland, nature was one of our strategic priorities, and indeed sustainability is one of the company values. So as I said, we are the second largest landowner in Northern Ireland and the largest consumer of electricity. So we see that impact of climate change firsthand when weather-related events happen, whether that's drought and a lack of rain, or flooding because it's rained too hard, or freeze thaw whenever it's very cold and then the thaw comes. So, of course, we really want to play our part and tackle our own carbon footprint in NI Water. But as time has gone by and we've looked at that, we now realise that us playing our part will help reduce not only our own carbon footprint, but we can actually help facilitate some of the Northern Ireland-wide reduction initiatives that will be needed. We've come up with a series of big, bold, positive ideas to try and tackle climate emergency. And some of them are really simple and self-explanatory, and some of them are a bit more complex. Very simply, one of the very simple things is planting 1 million trees. So we've already made a start in that as the second largest landowner. Ireland actually is one of the most deforested parts of Europe, and Northern Ireland is even more deforested than the Republic. So we've already made a start in that, and we've been planting trees in the Mournes in conjunction with the Woodland Trust. So we've set ourselves a target over the next 10 years to plant 1 million trees. Renewable energy is key, and again we're looking at how do we facilitate renewables on our land, and that's a kind of simple mix of either building our own, and we recently built a 6 megawatt solar farm on the shores of Lough Neagh, and that provides the power for our largest water treatment works. And the other element that we're looking at is, can we open up our land to third-party developers? So there is the potential on some of our elevated sites for us to host the largest wind farm in Northern Ireland. It could be as big as 200 megawatts, which would be the equivalent of about a third of a conventional power station. And then that whole area of renewables is really interesting because there is an ambition here in Northern Ireland to double the amount of generation that comes from renewable sources. And I think we now know that wind is likely to be that prevalent source. And really there's probably two factors to consider with wind. So number one, the wind can drop. So wind can just drop off and our power needs won't. And the second thing is the wind blows day and night. But at night in Northern Ireland, we don't use much power. So what that means is if you're a wind developer and you build a turbine, you don't have a market for your energy, and wind energy at night is currently being wasted. So that wouldn't be a sustainable model, and therefore we wouldn't be able to double the amount of wind energy that's coming into Northern Ireland. So where does the water company have a role in that? Well, on a couple of fronts. So the first one is we have 3,000 grid connections all over Northern Ireland, and some of them are very high capacity. And as we've learned over recent years, that's a very valuable commodity because the electricity network is quite congested. So those grid connections could be utilised in reverse to support the network. So if we had energy storage on our sites, when the wind drops off, we could feed back out into the network. And that energy storage could take the form of batteries on our sites, or it could be energy stored via hydrogen storage. And that takes us to a really interesting proposition, something that we're very proud to be involved in. So hydrogen can be produced if you electrolyse water, or indeed if you take the final effluent from a wastewater treatment works and you electrolyse it, you get hydrogen and you also get oxygen. Now, we use oxygen in our wastewater process. What it does is it encourages the good bugs to eat the bad bugs and it cleans the waste from the water. So we think that oxygen might help increase capacity at our works, so allowing us to treat more waste in the same existing footprint. And we're testing that theory at the minute. And electrolyzers are energy-hungry pieces of equipment. But if they ran at night using the surplus energy from the wind farms, then maybe we have created almost a virtuous circle. So green energy from the wind farms powers an electrical load that produces hydrogen, which in turn can be used for energy storage for release when the green energy is unavailable. And the side benefit is that the oxygen isn't vented, it's fed into the wastewater treatment process and increases its capacity. So we have a very small electrolyser up and running at the minute to help us test the oxygen theory. And we've worked with the Department for the Economy and secured funding for a 1 megawatt pilot electrolyser, which we'll be siting at one of our wastewater treatment works. And that can help to potentially stimulate a hydrogen economy here in Northern Ireland.
Fascinating. So you could become a fuel supplier.
Absolutely. So we're looking at those wastewater treatment works, which are all close to all our major urban settings. And we're saying, could they become a network of green fueling stations? So could they either produce hydrogen for larger vehicles, or could they host fast charge points for electric vehicles, making the use of the grid connections that we have? So really fascinating stuff. And those wastewater treatment works actually could, there's heat in that wastewater. So could that heat be captured and used for district heating schemes, or be used to heat greenhouses for widespread agri-food production? So there's a world of opportunity in harnessing that close working with the assets of the publicly owned water company and really driving towards low cost sustainable energy solutions here in Northern Ireland.
Now, potentially, of course, that will mean you are generating extra revenue. But as things stand, you have, as you were saying, miles and miles of pipes and sewers. I reckon it's more than 16,000 miles of pipes and more than 9,000 miles of sewers to maintain. And that requires a lot of investment at a time when there are so many different financial demands on the public purse, and when, unlike some other areas in the UK, we don't have water charges. Do you have enough cash at your disposal to keep your system up to date?
Well, that traditionally has been a real issue for us. More and more right across Northern Ireland, I think people are coming to see the services that we provide very much as an enabler. So really what we do is we facilitate the ambitions of many across society. And then that means that our infrastructure needs to be resilient and it needs to support growth, which really means it needs to be invested in advance of that growth. And you're right, we're publicly owned. And in essence, that really means that we're only being permitted to invest in line with allocations set by the Northern Ireland Executive. And those allocations score against the overall block grant, so the amount of money that's available for the whole of Northern Ireland. And what has happened over this past 10 years plus is local government really hasn't made the level of investment needed available to us. So the money that we have had has gone into ensuring that our public water supply is safe. And so we haven't been able to grow our wastewater treatment capacity and our wastewater networks. And it's that infrastructure that's really vital in supporting economic growth. So the current investment profile simply isn't sustainable. And that's really where the phrase drains before cranes was coined. So if we want to see cranes in the skyline, we really have to invest in the drainage infrastructure. So what we've done is we've set out a 6-year investment programme that starts to address those development constraints, and we have increased the investment in our wastewater assets fourfold. The overall capital plan that we're looking at for the next 6 years is over £2 billion, and we are working then with the government to try and secure that funding. So we've had lots of positive, encouraging noises from our minister, who has spoken at the Assembly, and actually from departments right across government. So I'm hopeful that just recognising the key role that this infrastructure plays in supporting the ambitions of so many. So whether that's the ambitions of the economy or of the social housing that the communities minister is so interested in, as well as the development community. It's not so much as, should we invest in this? I think it's absolutely essential that it is invested in. And the great news is that we stand ready to deliver that.
The pandemic has had a massive effect on many elements of the economy, including the recruitment of new staff. What efforts is Northern Ireland Water making to get young people involved in your business?
So Northern Ireland Water is a fantastic organisation, and do you know what? Our people are really loyal, and I think they must love working for us, because we have many of our team that have some with greater than 20 years, greater than 30 years, and actually some with even greater than 40 years service. As a result, probably almost 50% of our workforce is over 55. Now, that workforce has a wealth of experience, but what we're planning for now is that orderly handover to the next generation. So we're bringing in apprentices for both our frontline roles and also for some of our more technical roles. So frontline apprenticeships and higher level apprenticeships, where we want to grow the workforce for tomorrow. So it's a really exciting time. We have onboarded this year, in this pandemic year, 30 apprentices into our apprenticeship academy, and we intend to continue add to that number in the coming years, and we'll soon be launching higher level apprenticeship schemes as well for Northern Ireland. So it's a really exciting time, and loads of opportunities for new starts because of that sort of increase in investment that we'll be delivering.
You're a working mother, Sarah, with 3 daughters, so you're used to balancing the demands of business and family life. What advice might you give to other women who want to make it to the top of their chosen field?
Well, I suppose 3 things maybe, probably quite simple and basic, and maybe applicable to both men and women. So first one for me, and it's maybe a little more female orientated, is don't give up. So if I think back to when I had my first daughter, when you start a family and you go back to work, it's undoubtedly tough, and you do doubt yourself and your own ability to be able to do everything, and you may well be tempted to say, I can't do this all, so I'll stop working or I'll step back from work. And my strong advice would be to stick with it, and just to think about who are my support network, and to use that support network, because you don't have to do it all yourself. So that was a key moment for me. The second one, which I would say to anybody, is to do your best. No matter what the task, do it to the best of your ability. And I think that has been my mantra from my early school years. And one of our own NI Water values is excellence. And I just think that has stood me in great stead over the years. And the third area would really be say yes to opportunities. So if I think back over my career, so many times I've been asked to take on a task or a role, and quite often I was sure I didn't have the knowledge or the skills, that were maybe needed, or actually maybe thought I'm too junior for such a task. But in asking me to step up or step forward, someone was willing to have faith in me and in my abilities. So I did. I said yes, and I think that's how I learned, and that's how I had the skills and was ready to progress the whole way through. So give it a go. Those are my 3 pieces of advice for what they're worth.
Do you ever get the chance to switch off and decompress? And if so, what do you do with that time?
Yeah, so I do have. I'm working in utilities. It's almost an always on job. I always have my phone with me. Our services are 24/7, and I am ready to respond if I'm needed. But I have a super team, and we have lots of out of hours arrangements in place. So I'm most often not needed in those instances. And I think what's maybe important is to find a way to wind your brain down. So to switch off all those cunning ploys that are running in circles in your mind. And I do that in a few ways. So if I can get a run in the mornings before the working day, it really sets me up for a super day. So I've been able to do that quite consistently over this past few months in lockdown. And I just love starting my day with that feeling of achievement. So the running is great, and I feel I've done something. And at the end of the day, I sit down to dinner with my family and catch up on all that has happened in the girls' days, or indeed my husband's, and that sort of transition, a marker, which is the transition from I'm working to I'm home, helps. And then, I think I'm quite boring. I'm a fan of mind-numbing TV box sets. So I love an American medical or crime drama series. And if my brain isn't adequately switched off after that, I finish with a good read before I fall asleep. And that's how I switch off.
A little birdie tells me you've been known to join in with the Northern Ireland Water Choir.
Well, that was one of my trying to show that I was part of the team. I'm not a good singer, so we decided we'd have a choir in NI Water, and I thought I'll go along. And when I first went, they asked what type of voice did I have, soprano or alto. Well, I didn't even know what all those things were, and I just thought if they make me sing on my own, I'm beat. But I found my place in the choir, and it was fantastic. Singing in the choir, it was absolutely brilliant. You felt so much better. We did it at lunchtime, and we sounded amazing. We gave a few concerts, and we did a few things to raise money for WaterAid. I loved it. It was brilliant. Now, I didn't do the online choir version because I really felt you were a bit more exposed there for your singing skills, and my skills are not great, but I loved my time in the choir, and it was fantastic.
What would you single out as being your greatest challenge so far? I mean, I can recall the rather fraught days around the freeze-thaw crisis. Was that it?
I think it probably was. I joined NI Water in 2011, and I was less than 6 months in the job when Northern Ireland probably had its worst winter than it had had in decades, and there was a widespread impact on the water network. So the temperature for sub-zero for almost a month, and on Boxing Day the temperature rose by over 15 degrees, and all the pipes thawed out and they burst. And they burst, in businesses and in customer homes, but the water was leaking everywhere, and there was widespread customer impact. And so I left the house here on the 26th of December, and we worked 18, 20-hour days right through to the 6th of January to bring everything back into control. It was relentless. And during that period, the NI Water CEO resigned. We were called dormant to give account of ourselves. And then we had a workforce who had worked round the clock, who had delivered, but their organisation was being talked about in very negative terms in the media. So people were demoralised. There was a real lack of pride actually at that time. And as an organisation, we were subject to maybe 3 or 4 possible separate reviews. So hugely challenging for me as the leader of that part of the business. And really the work that we did, I needed to be very personally resilient. And I had great family support, and that really helped me. And then as a team in NI Water, actually we embraced, we looked at what happened, we embraced it, we learned from it, and truly, when I look at some of the systems that we've put in place and the things that we can do today, we really built back better. And while it was a horrible experience to live through, it certainly had a lot of benefits coming out the other side. And I think we're all stronger for it.
Any advice you'd have for other business leaders about getting through major challenges like that?
Yeah, I think, I suppose I was very lucky in having that family support and to be able to come home and to talk at home, and just having confidence in yourself and in your team, and just keeping calm head. What do we need to do? Devise your plan and work your way through it, and that's what we did, and it worked really well for us.
Well, thanks, Sarah, for taking time out of your schedule to talk to us. Hopefully our listeners will enjoy this conversation as much as I did. That brings to a close this edition of In Conversation With, hosted by me, Mark Devenport. The Northern Ireland Chamber podcast series is brought to you in partnership with the executive search firm Narratology. If you're looking for that next step up in your career to C-suite level, why not get in touch with Ruth by checking out narratologyexec.com. That's narratologyexec.com. But for now, from all of us here, goodbye.